Hi ho, neighbors. Today we're going to talk about I'm on the wrong page here. Ooh, here we go. We're going to talk about the calculus of hyperbolic functions. All right. And so we're going to look at mainly derivatives, but we'll get into the rest in class. So let's talk about what a hyperbolic function is. Okay. So the first thing you see here, s of x equals sine h of x, which is the hyperbolic sign we often pronounce sinh. Okay, so it's gonna so this is the hyperbolic sign, and we pronounce it like sinh. Okay, you'll also see cosh. Okay, and we'll have all the other normal functions too. So here is s of x equals sinh of x. And notice here how we defined it, e to the x minus e to the negative x over 2. So notice those are the same things, the way it's defined. Okay. Similarly, cosine. All right, let's put the cosine up. There's that. And notice it's plus e to the negative x. All right, so all these fun things happen. What happens when we divide those two? When we divide those two, sine divided by cosine is tangent, right? Well, sinh divided by cosh is tangent. Okay. How do we get the secant? Well, we take 1 divided by the cosine. And notice those two things are the same graph as well. Okay. Here we go. So how do we get the cosecant? Okay, it's 1 divided by the sine, so it's the same as we have before. How do we get the cotangent? Right, the cotangent, right, and that's the same. All right, and so I don't expect that you know all this now. We'll practice this in class, but just so you have an idea of what's going on here. All right, and then the last thing here, can you see it? Is there a Pythagorean identity? Well, it's sort of. There's not quite perfect. It's cosine or cosh squared minus sinh squared. And when we put that there, notice it always equals 1. Okay, so if we write this as a note, cosh squared of x minus sinh squared of x, it always equals 1. Right? Regardless of what the x values are, it always equals 1. Right? So in class and in the assignments, we'll talk a little bit about the domains and the ranges of all these. We'll talk a little bit about inverse functions, okay? But this is the very, very, very basics that you need to know right now. Okay? So let's work this out, all right? Because we're doing calculus with it. So what's the derivative of the hyperbolic sign? Well, if you remember, that's the derivative of e to the x minus e to the negative x all over 2. Well, that's a real simple derivative to calculate. Oh boy. It's a simple derivative to calculate. Okay, the derivative of e to the x, okay, that derivative is e to the x. Hopefully you know this. The derivative of e to the negative x is e to the negative x times negative 1, right? But if I take a negative 1, okay, if I take times the derivative of negative 1, that makes that a positive, right? Okay, and then all of that's divided by 2. Well, we know that is the hyperbolic cosine of x. All right, let's continue. We won't do all of these. We'll work some in class, but as we continue on here, let's look at the derivative of the cosine, or hyperbolic cosine. Okay, and remember that's the derivative of, oh, how did that f get there? E to the x plus e to the negative x all over 2, which hopefully you know that's e to the x minus e to the negative x all over 2, which is hyperbolic sine of x. All right, so notice that the derivative of sine is cosine and the derivative of cosine is sine, which is different than what we would have expected. All right. Let's look at one other example, and then we will go into some other things here. So let's look at the derivative of cosecant. Okay. Now remember that cosecant is 1 over the sine. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So this is 2 over e to the x minus e to the negative x. And so this is going to involve a quotient rule. All right, well, the derivative of 2 is 0. So this is going to equal 0 times e to the x minus e to the negative x. We'll practice the quotient rule here. Minus e to the x plus e to the negative x times 2 all over e to the x minus e to the negative x squared. All right, now you might look at that and think, how will we ever know what this is? But trust me, we'll find a way. All right, so let's see what we can make of this here. All right, so you'll notice that hopefully you'll notice we have 2 parts here. We've got this squared, so we have negative e to the x plus e to the negative x over e to the x minus e to the negative x. And then we also have 2 over e to the x minus e to the negative x. Well, if you remember, this right here is, if we go back up here, that's just cosecant of x. Okay, and this part right here, notice that this is cosine over sine, the hyperbolics. And so you should notice that is cotangent. So this is negative cotangent, hyperbolic cotangent, and cosecant, which is the same derivative. All right, so let's summarize this a little bit. And you'll see all these. I haven't shown you all of them, but I've shown you a good number of them. Okay, so here is something you won't necessarily have to memorize, but what we've done is we've looked at that one, we looked at that one, and we looked at that one, and it's simple to prove the others based on what we just did. All right, I think that's about my time. That's the basics of derivatives, calculus of the hyperbolic functions. There's a lot more that we're going to talk about in class. So hopefully we will get those, but this will get you at least the basics to start. I don't know if I've said basic enough, but this is the basic of those. So guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in class.